The post office in Kenora smells the same every winter: dry heat, rubber stamp ink, and something faintly like old paper. I have been going there since my husband Harold was alive, back when we still sent Christmas cards by hand to everyone we knew. After he passed, I kept going. Habit, I suppose. Or maybe just needing somewhere to be on Tuesday mornings that was not the house. The textular Tuesday in November, 3 years after Harold died, I was waiting in line behind a woman with a stroller and a stack of padded envelopes. The line was slow. I did not mind. I had nowhere urgent to be. That was when the woman beside me, not in line, just standing near the bulletin board like she was reading the notices, leaned slightly toward me. She was older, maybe my age, maybe a few years younger. Brown coat, hair pulled back. She looked at me the way you look at someone when you have been watching them for a while and have made a decision. She pressed a small envelope into my hand. Not large, just a standard white envelope, sealed with nothing written on the outside. "You'll want to open that when you get home," she said. "Not here." I opened my mouth. She was already walking toward the door. By the time I got outside, she was gone. The parking lot was half empty. A pickup truck was pulling out. The cold hit me, and I stood there holding this envelope, looking at nothing in particular. I put it in my coat pocket and drove home. I will tell you the truth, I almost did not open it that night. I set it on the kitchen counter when I came in, made myself a cup of tea, sat at the table. I looked at it. I thought about Harold, about how he would have picked it up immediately, turned it over in his hands, said something like, "Well, are we opening this or not?" Harold was always more curious than cautious. I was always the other way. But I opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of paper and a small USB drive no bigger than my thumbnail taped to the inside of the envelope with a strip of clear tape. The paper said, "Check the drive. He recorded everything. You need to know what they've been planning." There was no signature. I sat with that for a long time. My tea went cold. The kitchen felt very quiet. My grandson, Theo, had given me a laptop 2 Christmases ago. He'd set it up for me, showed me how to video call, bookmarked the CBC website. I got up, found it on the desk in the spare room, and plugged in the drive. There were 3 folders, dated. The most recent was from 6 weeks before Harold died. I clicked on the first file. It was audio, Harold's voice. I had not heard his voice in 3 years. Not recorded, not in a video, nothing. We were not the kind of people who filmed things. I was not prepared for it. The particular way he cleared his throat before he spoke, the slight formality he always had when he was being serious. I had to sit down on the floor because the chair suddenly seemed too far away. He said, "If you're hearing this, then something happened, and I wasn't able to tell you myself. I'm sorry for that. I need you to listen to everything before you do anything. Promise me you'll listen to everything." I listened to everything. It took most of the night. Let me tell you about my grandson, Theo, because you need to understand who I thought he was before I can explain what he actually was. He was 26 when all of this happened. My daughter Lynn's boy. Lynn passed from cancer 8 years ago, and after that, Theo was the only family I had nearby. He had his father's build, tall, broad-shouldered, but Lynn's eyes, that particular gray-green. He used to come for Sunday dinners. He helped me with the yard in spring and helped Harold with the Evistros the summer before Harold got sick. When Harold's health got bad, Theo drove him to appointments. He sat in the waiting rooms. He held the door. I thought he was a good young man. I thought I was lucky. His girlfriend Paige I had known for 2 years. She worked in property management, she said. She was efficient and pleasant, and I noticed she asked very particular questions whenever she came over. about the house, about Harold's pension, about whether we had updated the will recently. I thought she was just organized. Some people are organized. I understand now that organized is not always the same as kind. What Harold had recorded, carefully, methodically, over the last 8 months of his life was a series of conversations. Some were between Theo and Paige. Some were phone calls. A few were with a man I did not recognize, someone they called by a nickname I could not make sense of. Harold had set up a small recording device in his home office. He never told me. He was protecting me from knowing, I think, until he was sure. What Theo and Paige had been planning was this. Harold had 64 acres of land north of town, inherited from his own father. We had never farmed it, never developed it. There was a small equipment shed and a stand of white birch along the north edge, and otherwise it was just land, good land, quiet land. Harold loved it for that reason alone. He used to drive out there in autumn and just walk. What Theo and Paige had discovered, through Paige's work contacts, was that a development company out of Winnipeg had been quietly acquiring parcels in that corridor for planned residential expansion. Ours was one of 3 remaining properties they needed. The offer, if it came, would be significant. Harold had heard enough from a lawyer friend to know it would be in the range of $900,000. Theo knew this before Harold did. Paige had a contact inside the development company. What they were planning was to have Harold's will amended, or, if that proved difficult, contested after the fact, so that the land went to Theo directly rather than to me. They had been consulting, in the recordings, with someone about what they would need to establish, that Harold had been cognitively declining, that he had not been of sound mind, that any recent changes to documents might not be valid. Harold had noticed small things. Documents moved on his desk. A phone call. Theo ended quickly when Harold walked into the room. Paige asking once, very casually, whether Harold had a family lawyer or whether he used whoever was cheapest. Harold was not a suspicious man by nature, but he was a careful man, and he had been a licensed land surveyor for 31 years, which meant he understood property law well enough to know when someone was circling. He had gone quietly to a lawyer in Thunder Bay, not our usual one, and had his will reviewed and re-executed. He had updated the title on the property to pass directly to me outside of the estate. He had done this without telling me because he did not want me frightened and because he was not entirely certain he was right about Theo. He wanted to be sure before he said anything. He got sick before he could be sure. The recordings were his backup plan. I sat on the floor of the spare room with the laptop open and Harold's careful voice explaining all of this. Property law. The specific clause in the will, the name and number of the lawyer in Thunder Bay, the fact that everything was already in order if I needed to act. He had thought of almost everything. He had done this while he was ill, while he was frightened, while he was trying to hold on. He did it so I would be all right. I was not all right that night, but I listened to all of it. The next morning I did not call Theo. That was the hardest part. Not calling him, not confronting him immediately, because I wanted to. I wanted to call him and say, I know. But Harold's voice had been very clear on this point too. Don't call him first. Call the lawyer first. The textage came on a Thursday morning while I was reading my rosemary on the back. I called the lawyer in Thunder Bay at 9 in the morning. Her name was Carolyn, and she was brisk and competent, and she confirmed that she had met with Harold and that everything he had described on the recording was accurate. The land transfer had been registered. The will was properly executed. She said, "Your husband was very thorough." She said it was something that was not quite warmth, but was close to it. She also said that the recordings, depending on how they had been obtained, might have legal complications if it came to a dispute, but that given the land was already properly titled, there was likely nothing for Theo to contest. He'd have to prove Harold was incapacitated at the time of the transfer, she said. And from what I saw of your husband, that would be a very difficult argument to make. I drove out to the land that afternoon. I parked at the gate and sat in the car for a while. The birch trees had lost most of their leaves by then, but a few were still holding on, pale yellow against a flat gray sky. I got out and walked the perimeter the way Harold used to. It took 40 minutes. My boots got muddy. I did not mind. I thought about Harold driving out here alone while he was sick, thinking through all of this, making plans, making sure I would be all right. I thought about Theo sitting at my table, eating Sunday dinner, asking about Harold's health, all that time knowing what he was planning. I thought about the woman in the post office, the brown coat, how she had watched me in line and made a decision. I still do not know who she was. I have never found out. The text in Dame on a Thursday morning. That answered. How are you doing, Grandma? Fine, I said. I'm fine. Come for dinner Sunday. He said he would. He sounded the same as always. I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a long time. I spent the following 2 weeks talking to Carolyn, gathering everything Harold had left, making sure I understood exactly what I had and what I was protected against. Carolyn put me in touch with someone who reviewed the recordings from a privacy law standpoint. In Ontario, recording a conversation you are a party to is generally permissible, which Harold had known, which was why he had been careful to be present in every conversation he recorded. He had thought of that too. What I had not expected was Paige. She called me on a Thursday, not Theo, Paige. She said she was calling to check in, to see how I was doing, to ask if I needed any help with anything around the house before winter set in properly. Her voice was warm. It was practiced warm. I had not heard it that way before. Or maybe I had and I had not known how to hear it. The house is fine, I said. Thank you. I was also wondering, she said. And here the warmth shifted slightly, became something just under professional, whether you'd given any thought to the property north of town. Theo mentioned you might be thinking about whether it made sense to hold on to it long term. At your age, the maintenance, the property taxes. I said, I haven't given it any thought at all. A pause. Right, of course. If you ever want someone to look at options, I have contacts who. Paige, I said, thank you for calling. I hung up. I called Carolyn the next morning and told her about the call. She said, good, keep a record of that. I wrote it down with the date and the time. 2 weeks later, I had dinner with Theo. I made his mother's recipe, beef stew, the kind Lynn used to make on cold nights. He ate 2 bowls. He talked about work, about a friend who was moving to Calgary, about a hockey game he'd watched. He was easy company. He had always been easy company. At the end of the evening, when he was putting on his coat in the hallway, he said, I've been meaning to ask, did Dad ever say anything to you about the Kenora land, about what he wanted done with it? I looked at him. He was my daughter's son. He had Harold's eyes too, a little, around the outside. He was a person I had loved without reservation for 26 years. I said he was very clear. I have everything in writing. Something moved across Theo's face, quickly, controlled, gone. He said, of course, that makes sense. He kissed my cheek. He left. He did not come for Sunday dinner after that. He called less. The calls got shorter. By February, they had stopped altogether. Paige, I did not hear from again. I want to be careful here about what I say, because it is complicated and I am still sorting through it. Theo never did anything overtly. He never filed anything, never made a formal move. Harold's preparation had made it unnecessary, which meant there was nothing legal to pursue. In a way, I was lucky. In another way, That meant I had to decide what to do with what I knew without any formal process to help me do it. I thought about calling him. I thought about it for a long time. In the end, in March, I sent him a letter, handwritten. I told him that I knew. I told him I had listened to everything Harold had left, and that I understood what he had been planning. I told him that I had loved him and that his mother had loved him, and that I did not know how he had arrived at a place where this had seemed like the right thing to do. I told him that I was not going to take any legal action. There was nothing to take action on, but that I needed him to understand that I knew. I also told him something else. I told him that when Harold was sick, really sick toward the end, Theo had sat with him in a hospital waiting room for 4 hours while I was in a meeting with a specialist. Harold had told me about it afterward. He said Theo had just sat there, hadn't said much, had bought him a bad cup of coffee from the vending machine. Harold had said he didn't have to do that, and he was right. Theo hadn't had to do that. I said in the letter, I don't know which version of you is the real one, maybe both are, but I know that one of them was kind to your grandfather when he needed company, and I'm holding on to that. I haven't heard back. It has been almost a year now. The development company did make an offer, as it turned out. They reached out in April through a property agent. The offer was $840,000 for the 64 acres. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to Carolyn. I talked to a financial advisor she recommended, a woman named Sandra, who had an office in Thunder Bay, and a very no-nonsense manner that I found reassuring. We talked about taxes, about what I would actually clear after capital gains, about what made sense for my situation. In the end, I said no to the development company, not because of the money. The money would have been significant. I said no because Harold had loved that land, because Lynn had played in those birch trees as a child, because some things are worth more than what someone is willing to pay for them, and because I am 68 years old and I am allowed to make decisions based on what matters to me rather than what is financially optimal. Sandra thought I was slightly irrational. She was professional about it. I liked her anyway. I still drive out there on autumn Saturdays. I park at the gate and I walk the perimeter the way Harold used to. The birch trees are starting to look bare again. It is late October as I am telling you this, and the leaves are almost gone. My boots get muddy. I do not mind. I think about the woman in the brown coat sometimes. I think about her watching me in that line and making a decision, deciding for whatever reason that I needed to know what was on that drive. I wonder how she knew Harold. I wonder how she knew to find me. I wonder whether she knows how things turned out. I do not know if I will ever find out, but I know that Harold had people in his life who cared enough to make sure I was protected when he could not protect me himself. He had always been like that. He collected loyal people without seeming to try. It was one of the things I loved about him. It was one of the things I was still discovering about him 3 years after he was gone. The text Thursday morning while I was repotting. Long after they are gone, you find letters you didn't know existed, people who tell you things he did that he never mentioned, recordings on a small USB drive that explain a season of his life you weren't allowed to share because he was trying to keep you safe. It is not comfortable, that kind of love. It is heavy and ungainly, and it does not fit anywhere cleanly. But it is mine. He left it to me on purpose, and I am keeping it. I keep coming back to the birch trees, not to the land deal, not to Theo, not even to the recordings. Just the trees, standing bare in October, holding on to their last few leaves longer than you'd expect anything to hold on. Harold loved that land because it asked nothing of him. He used to say that. He'd come back from a Saturday walk out there and say, "It just lets you be." I did not fully understand what he meant when he was alive. I think I understand it now. What strikes me most, looking back, is not the betrayal itself, though that was real, and it hurt in ways I am still sorting through. What strikes me is how long it takes to understand what someone actually was. Theo sat at my table for years. He drove his grandfather to appointments. He bought him bad coffee from a vending machine and sat with him for 4 hours without being asked. And he also planned, quietly and carefully, to take something that was not his. Both of those things are true at the same time. I have had to learn to hold them both without resolving them into something tidier. I think that is what integrity actually costs. Not the big dramatic moments, but the slow work of seeing clearly when it would be easier not to. Harold saw clearly. He noticed small things, took them seriously, and then did something careful and methodical about what he noticed instead of either panicking or looking away. He had the kind of mind that could stay honest under pressure, that could follow a difficult thing to its conclusion without flinching. The kind of clear-sightedness is not common. I did not appreciate it enough when I had it beside me every day. And the stranger in the brown coat. I think about her too. She made a decision. She could have told herself it was not her business, that she did not know enough, that the consequences of getting involved were unpredictable. People tell themselves those things all the time. She didn't. She found me in a post office line in November, and she did the harder thing. That is its own kind of courage. The quiet kind that nobody applauds, that nobody may even know about. I don't know her name. I never will. But she acted, and that action changed the rest of my life. I said no to $840,000. People think that is irrational. Maybe it is. But I have learned, more than anything this past year, that the things worth holding on to are rarely the things with the highest market value. You hold on to what shaped you. You hold on to what someone you loved walked through in autumn, sick and frightened, because he wanted you to still have it after he was gone. That is not sentimentality. That is understanding what things are actually for. What carried me through all of it, the recordings, the phone call from Paige, the letter I wrote and never heard back from, was not certainty. I was not certain about anything for most of it. What carried me through was the decision to keep going anyway, to call Carolyn in the morning, to drive out to the land, to write the letter even knowing I might never get a reply. Grief and fear do not go away because you act in spite of them, but they become something you carry differently. The leaves on the birch trees are almost gone now. Next spring they will come back. I will drive out on a Saturday and walk the perimeter, and my boots will get muddy, and I will not mind. Harold left me that too, the not minding.